Lee, thank you so much for your time. I know you're a busy man. So looking forward to talking to you. You have been following your work for ages. What have you been up to?
I've been living the COVID life, trying to get by with the online sort of side of things now, which has been a big transition for a lot of people. So luckily enough, I've been already sort of involved with it, but it's definitely taken on a lot more volume of my work day these days compared to the fact that I can't work with clients in person because gyms have been closed, and it's been this kind of seesaw yo-yo battle for the last 9 or 10 months for us here in Toronto. So it's definitely an adjustment period, and it's going okay on my side. But I know there's a lot of trainers out there who could definitely use a little bit of help, and a lot of gyms are having to shut down and whatnot. So it's a pretty serious situation out here. So that's really the storm I've been weathering out here, and working with students as well virtually because I'm teaching classes that way. And just online coaching, online virtual teaching, and that's basically it other than my writing. So it's been interesting, it's been tumultuous, and I've been sort of trying to rise to the occasion here.
What was the hardest battle you had, let's say for the first lockdown or generally in the COVID era? What did you find hardest?
I would say, well, honestly, I welcomed quite a few aspects of it just because of the fact that you get the chance to sleep in a little bit later, and you get more rest and all that sort of thing. I got to focus on training as well for myself a little bit more than I used to, which is great. But I'd say the hardest aspect for sure is just the fact that now you're missing that hands-on sort of working with clients one-on-one. Now, there are a lot of people out there who prefer online coaching because you can technically handle more volume than you could just doing one-on-one, and there's only so many hours in a day. But for me, I'm sort of grassroots when it comes to, I want to be able to see and assess the client. I want to be able to give tactile cues. I want to be able to, touch their shoulders and whatnot to help them understand how to do something correctly and so on. And so for me, just being somebody who's always been about the hands-on, and for me, someone who has had an athletic background of being very hands-on with my sports that I played, it was a real hit when somebody said, okay, well, I guess now I'm just stuck with doing programming that you prescribe for me, and you can't train me one-on-one. So it's a little bit of a transition. That was tough to deal with, but I'm trying to come along.
There's always a way. If you focus on the problem, they're always going to see problems. If you focus on the solution, always going to be a solution. And that was a really good segue about what I wanted to, because I know you're a person that not a lot of people actually talk about assessments and about hands-on. And I was in a panel a few weeks ago, in a European panel regarding the future of personal training and training generally. And a lot of trainers are actually really stressing, what's going to happen? I was like, it's the same thing which is going to happen when we are individuals, and we need to assess, we need to put our hands on the client. I'm not a big, I have online clients because I have to, but my number one thing is my assessment. What is your, can you write me a program? The most classical line is, can you give me some exercises? How the hell can we do that when we actually have no clue about that person?
Exactly. And, when somebody does that or says that, it's your classic thing that someone will say if you're at an event or a party or a get together or something like that. Oh, so what's the best exercises to do for this? Because you're a trainer, right? And it's like, well, listen, if it was that universal, then everybody in the world would be walking around completely jacked, right? Because it would be that easy to really get results and so on. And it's not like that. So, it's very case by case. It's very, very assessment based. It's very specific. And that's where, okay, here, let's put it this way. So I'm doing online coaching now. I've always done online coaching, but I only handle right now, I have 20 or 21 clients that I'm working with at one given time. And that is a lot for me.
Yes.
That's a lot. Because when people will go and say they have 50, 60, 100 clients and so on, it's like there's no possible chance that I could imagine that they're actually handwriting all of these programs or typing them out, saying them, and then doing all the groundwork that's necessary and the intake process that's necessary to really give them a product that they're going to be safe and comfortable giving them without any sort of like
individualized.
Yeah, exactly. Individualized. And so for me, my intake process when it comes to working with an online client, it's okay. First, they're going to fill out a questionnaire of mine. And mine is pretty light. Let me just put it this way. But this is what I do. I'll give them a questionnaire that they're going to fill out. And so then it's going to give me some info about their lifestyle, about their training history, about their programming that they've done before, injuries, all sorts of stuff like that. I get as much information from them as I can in a succinct little questionnaire. And then from there, once I get that information, I don't start writing the program yet. Then it's like, okay, I've got to see how you lift, how you move, and so on. So I want you to show me your primal movement patterns, get your phone out, videotape them, film them, and send me the files. And then from there, I'm going to actually see if I can give you some feedback and troubleshoot that stuff so that we can actually get on the same page technically. And then if I feel like I'm prepared, then I can actually start writing your program based on what I've seen here and based on what your goals are in the questionnaire. So it's a process, right?
Exactly.
If I'm doing that with somebody who I can't see or touch, imagine how much more thorough it should be if we can see and touch them. Like we got to be able to see them from multiple angles. We got to be able to see if their technique is good. We got to be able to look at different exercises. Me asking to see a squat, deadlift, overhead press, bench press, push up, row, and chin up, that's great. But, in person, I might want to see a cradle walk, a sideline twist, a Spider-Man walk, a squat, a deadlift, 2 types of squats, all kinds of things like that. So, this is sort of the nature of what the industry, in my opinion, should ask for somebody who's a client looking for individualized programming. And the cookie cutter thing where it's like, okay, I'm going to take this internet program that I just found on whatever.com and I'm going to do it. It might get you some results, but you have to understand that you are, like you said, if you're not assessing, then you're guessing, right?
Exactly.
And that's something that's very important for people, whether they're working with a trainer, whether they are trainers or not. They have to remember that everybody, the shoe doesn't fit for every single foot, and it's gotta be individualized to some extent. And you're going to be entering a little bit more of an area of risk, even if there is merit in the program and it's a good looking program. Is it made for you? That program can't necessarily determine what your injury history was, how old you are, what your leverages are like, what your stress levels are like, or the nature of your work, what your responsibilities are on a day-to-day basis, all that sort of stuff, what your real age is, what your training age is. All those things really, really matter. And, a program is only as good as the person who's capable of doing it. So, it's a long-winded, convoluted topic that I think that deserves more attention to understand that it is individualized, and that puts a lot of emphasis on the importance for people like myself, people like trainers and so on, who can really, really sort of cut away a lot of the excess stuff and get right down to what matters for the individual.
That's really important because that's the problem everybody gets to when they find a program that said, oh, why would I pay you X amount of money when I can get this app and do that easily? And I said, well, you're not paying me for my time or my program, you're paying me for what I know, generally. One is that. And second of all is an app cannot assess you. But to go back to assessment, because someone would say, okay, someone just saw me lift. What is your protocol of assessing? Like what we actually say anthropometry, right? Being able to, first of all, we're not a perfect machine. I'm against. I hate the word perfect. I've worked the past 6-7 years in cadavers, a couple of years now teaching in cadaver labs, and nothing is perfect.
Right.
Maybe in a textbook, but not in the real life.
And that's the bridge. That's exactly that gap that needs to be bridged, especially if students of any sort are listening to this and they're interested in getting into, fitness as some kind of a career path. They have to understand that most of this sort of thing is based on educated guess. Lots of it is based on inference. There's nothing that is written in stone. There's always going to be that client who says that they feel they get more calf development once they put bicep curls into their routine, or somebody who's doing hamstring curls and they feel it in their shins. Like, there are things that we can't completely explain, and that's going to vary from person to person. On that note, when it comes to perfect symmetry and perfect balance and all that sort of stuff, like you're referring to, there's no such thing. And there's going to be stuff where, okay, your stance might be off just by a little bit for your perfect squat compared to someone else. Someone might be able to squat this way versus squatting this way with their feet. You know, there are so many different things, and no two bodies are going to fit the same way. No two bodies are identical to one another, right? We can get into it about the acetabulae and talk about hip anatomy and all sorts of actual physical construction of the body, or we could just get into it in terms of, from an individual basis, what kind of compensations based on whatever it is, this rotation through here or a little bit more extension through here or whatnot, is going to promote the best looking and the best quality and the most pain-free movement pattern for someone, less injurious stuff, of course. So this it's really got to be sort of played into. We got to play that into the picture when we're talking about assessing somebody or when we're giving somebody an assessment. And so for me, I take things pretty simply. I like to look at things kind of backwards in order for me to get the good idea of what I want to sort of strip away and what I want to troubleshoot. So if someone comes to me and says, okay, Lee, I'm a brand new client of yours. I've been lifting a little bit or whatever. I want to start training with you. Say, okay, cool. First session, I'm going to go through your primal movement patterns. I'll look at your squat, your deadlift, your overhead press, given you're familiar with all these movements, right? Squat, deadlift, overhead press, your chin up, your row, your push-up pattern, bench press even. I'll look at all that stuff, all the different movement patterns, the horizontal and vertical pushes and pulls. When I see that, it doesn't mean that I'm going to load 300 on all those lifts. It means that I'm going to go through maybe a goblet squat pattern. Maybe I'll go through an empty bar overhead press, etc. And I'm going to see what the finished product looks like. And if I see dysfunction in that level where this is the major movement you're having problems with, well, then we start stripping away. Now I'm going to start looking at thoracic. I'm going to start looking at rotation. I'm going to start looking at your shoulder mobility, your AC joint construction, and whether or not that's blocking your shoulder mobility. And I start stripping away and start seeing whether or not this movement is poor because of the quality of the technique, or is it something else, right? And so this is sort of the approach that I'll use for all those kinds of movements. If goblet squat doesn't look that great or so on, then I might start going into single leg work. I might start going into some supine work so that you're doing things from the ground and so on. Look at your core, look at your abdominals, look at your glutes and so on, whether or not that stuff is firing. Take a look at pelvic balance and so on. So I kind of like working backwards, and so it doesn't take too much crazy elaborate stuff. And, it doesn't resonate too well with me when people really try to go through this like 10 million point assessment with things rather than just taking things very simply and helping them perform well based on their body type, and based on what limitations and restrictions they might have and what needs that they might have as individuals, so that we can help them move pain-free and move well and be strong while they do it.
That's really important we get, as you said, limitations, because that's why I find really like, I go to a gym and I see some trainers and like, oh, you need to go a bit lower and squat a bit lower. And you're like, this guy would never get to that point structurally. Right. You know what I mean? Like, and you see that all the time. If it's not ass to grass, it doesn't count. And you're like, well, there are some limitations. As we said before, we're not going to talk about hip anatomy, or femur length, or there's so many different variables. Yes, you can assess and see if the person is flexible, mobile enough, and that's would be my other question. What about flexibility? What about mobility? I've seen really nice articles you wrote about it, and what's the case?
So for flexibility and mobility, I think that they're both super duper important, first of all. And I am a huge proponent, especially as a trainer sort of starts getting advanced in years. When they spend a lot of time under the iron and whatnot, those two factors should raise in importance. So they're almost meeting the amount that strength and resistance training and all that stuff sort of has in terms of its level of importance to your programming, to your entire day-to-day. So sometimes there's a lot of emphasis towards strength training and pushing PRs and getting to the next level of strength and breaking plateaus and whatnot. Well, the very plateaus you have might be because of limitations in your mobility and flexibility. So the thing that we got to really focus on is making sure that we strike a good balance as we spend more time training and lifting, because it's the only way that we're going to, A, not experience the world of chronic pain as time goes on, B, get injured acutely, and C, last the test of time so we we can keep on doing this when we're 80 and 85 years old. So my take on mobility and flexibility is that, yes, they're both important. And secondly, that mobility is going to be a little bit more important than flexibility in the big scheme of things, because mobility is still going to be muscular and contraction based, whereas flexibility is often more passive, right? So when it comes to mobility, we want to think about what muscles we can activate to their nth degree in order to pull our joints into a certain range of motion to achieve that range, right? And that's the difference really between flexibility and mobility, whereas I can do a tricep stretch by holding onto my elbow like this and pulling it across my head like that, and I'll stretch right in my triceps like that. Or I can use my biceps and my upper back and traps to pull my elbow to the same place without using any sort of assistance. And exactly. Those muscles pulling me into that range of motion creates the same level of joint angle and the same level of stretch to my triceps. So mobility is going to be more important because it's making your body, by way of action, actually move your body and move your joints around. So we want that capability as we get older. We want to not lose that joint integrity by way of having good, strong muscles. And strength and mobility, they really feed off of one another. And if we want to get more mobile, then we have to make sure our strength is up. If we want to get stronger, we want to make sure we don't lose any mobility. And that's sort of the tug of war that we got to keep on playing with ourselves. That's going to come from diversifying our training a whole lot and not just focusing on 4 or 6 lifts in the gym and getting as strong as we can and the heaviest we can of those lifts.
That's really important, because I usually I am a proponent of not stretching in the way that, okay, let's stay in a specific position, just stretch the muscle, because we know that when we stretch a muscle, it becomes weaker, right? And we know that actually the nervous system, your body doesn't wake up one day and says, oh, you know what, your tricep is going to be really stiff at this moment, it's going to have more tone, if we can use that, because also a lot of people are going to start spitting out words that they don't like. So I would say this is a compensatory mechanism that starts from your cerebellum to actually protect you in a way. So it's not about stretching the muscle, it's about seeing the assessments you did before. Is it a compensatory mechanism? Is it because you pulled more, so you didn't focus so much on the movement, but just on pulling weight, so you strained something? Is it because the other side is weak? Have you done any unilateral work, which a lot of people avoid? Stuff like that. I don't know. What's your opinion on that?
No, I agree 100%. And I just don't want the message that I'm saying here to get misconstrued. I believe flexibility is important. I believe mobility is more important. I think flexibility is something that we have to apply tactically when we do apply it. So what I mean by that is when you stretch a muscle, people will always think, okay, I'm going to put my heel on top of this chair or whatever and stretch my hamstrings. Okay, cool. So you stretch your hamstrings. Number one, what you said about, lowering the neural involvement, for example, and weakening the muscle tissue and so on, that's a thing. And we have to watch out for that. And if we're going to use it, we have to use it at the right time so that we know what we're doing and why we're doing that. Aside from that, though, we're not only stretching the muscle belly when we're stretching something, right? We're also stretching connective tissue. We're stretching nerve. We're stretching vein and artery. We're stretching fascia. We're stretching all sorts of other things that we might not, if we're thinking about it, want to actually be stretching out and lengthening that way or loosening. So with that said, and we're restricting blood flow as well at the same time. So said, is that the direction we always want to go with things? Well, I can think of different scenarios in which a static stretch might do me very good in terms of a training world, but at the same time, I can think of that many more where it's not exactly the way that we should think about it and the way that we should apply it. For most general population people, they'll look at stretching as the way to loosen up and open up and fix everything and so on, and it's not the answer, right? So I like to say this, and it usually gets people to think about things from a totally different perspective, right? We have this tug of war and this tension or balance of structural balance, so there's tension on either side of a load-bearing joint in order to keep that joint centrated properly and to keep your posture up and whatnot. So think about it this way. You got an old, decrepit person who walks around like this and so on. People will say, oh, they're tight. They've got to open up. They've got to loosen up. They've got to get their chest muscles. Old people don't need to get looser. Old people need to get tighter, right? They need to get more tonicity in the back of the muscles, those weak muscles that aren't doing their job to centrate the joints and give them the posture they want and help them stand straight and walk around properly and so on. That's what they really need, is to get tighter. So when we think of changing our perspective like that and realize that a tight muscle, or what appears to be a tight muscle, for lack of a better term, is probably the product of other weak muscles instead, well, this is what's going to start changing that perspective and balance in order for us to get the proper structural balance and the proper joint integrity and the mobility and all that other stuff that we need to regain in order to be functional again. So that's the way that I sort of like to approach it. And flexibility is a very convoluted topic, to be honest with you, compared to just describing mobility and how to achieve it. Flexibility is something we got to really, really pick and choose when we want to fight that battle, and how tactically we want to apply it in order to help us, for it to help us in our workouts.
What's about tickling the dragon's tail? It always needs to be, you need to be extra careful, especially with either people that coming back from an injury, because that's another thing another topic I want to. You've been an athlete, and you have been, you've been through that, and that's why I really appreciate everything you write, because you've been through all that pain and all that, kind of, you feel that, is that it? Am I gonna? That's my career, or I'm not gonna be an athlete anymore. But I always say that when you come back from an injury, you're a different biological person. There's a protection, there's protection from that joint or that articulation or that muscle that your body always going to inhibit. If you're a fast twitch player or in a competition, it's going to be a second thought.
Yeah, 100%.
What's your take? What's your strategy to actually clear that and clear the path for that person to just optimize performance or optimize health?
Well, it's tough, because if there are things that are sort of breaking them, so that are sort of setting them back from a mental perspective, especially if they had an injury in the past, then it's, we get into a conversation that might even involve sports psychology, right? And whether or not, we can do so much as trainers to sort of motivate them and give them the confidence that we can through ingraining good patterns and a background of great training with great technique and things that they might have accomplished in practice or in a training session that now can translate to much more confidence while they're actually doing the thing that might have gotten them injured in the first place, right? So there's definitely that, it emboldens them to really make their movements of quality and give them a good quality sort of output for the actual time that it matters, et cetera, right? If they're approaching a heavy lift, or if they're approaching a long jump or a sprinting event or whatever it is, just giving them that sort of peace of mind that all the stuff that you worked so hard for in the gym that might have even exceeded what the demands are of this actual event that you're about to compete in, these kinds of things can give them a little bit more, give them a little bit more confidence, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the number one. I always sort of put it right back on the training and the hard work that they've put into it. Speaking personally, not only as a guy who injured hamstrings and all kinds of when I was back in my early 20s running track and doing jumps and so on. I remember I slid on the takeoff board one time. My foot got caught and it wrenched my knee and hyperextended. So that put me out. I was afraid of the long jump takeoff board for months after that, months and months. I'd run down the track, and then as soon as I reached the takeoff board 4 steps away, I'd be slow, and then I take off and my jump was terrible, right? So that was a huge hurdle that I had to overcome. Then I had hamstring stuff that happened while I was running track and so on, so that was a big setback as well. Fast forward to well after I stopped running and well into my career as a trainer, I had one of the most devastating knee injuries that you could possibly imagine to both of my knees. And so there was a huge comeback story that was involved with that, and put me in a wheelchair, completely immobilized for months. So that those kind of hurdles, anecdotally, I can speak from personal experience when I know what it's like for someone to be sidelined or to be afraid of trying that next PR or trying that next heavy lift or going back into strength training or doing this thing that might be actually compromising the area that is tender for you right now, right? It's very sensitive stuff. And so I just, for me, myself, I always relied on, okay, you know what? I've done this before. You know what? I've put in the work to earn the fact that I'm here right now, making this attempt and doing it under a safe pretense and doing it in a controlled environment, a controlled system. There's not a freak situation that can happen unless a freak situation happens, right? So this is going to make this set very successful for me, and I'm confident about that. On the flip side, if I go into a set with poor confidence for that day or whatever, guess what? I'm stepping back. So you have to have the right mindset. You have
feedback always, yes.
Exactly, right? And you have to know when to draw the line. So it's not about trying to be a hero, but it's also about trusting your technique, your training, and so on. And mentally speaking, just knowing that you're in the right place to attempt this as well. If you're not, don't do it and try it another day.
Yeah, when people say no pain, no gain, I'm not a big fan of that, actually. It's all about, I will never forget that. I used to had a mentor. He was one of the most well-decorated Olympic lifters and coaching weightlifters in Greece. And I remember one Olympic lifter went to grab the bar and he said, "Step back." And I was like, "What?" And he said it took him a lot more to go towards the bar than he usually takes him. So he wasn't ready. And I was like, okay, fair point, actually. And when I asked the guy, I was like, I always want to find out what happened. He's like, yeah, I was thinking about the lift. And how important is that about being mentally there? You said about the injuries. What would be a step-by-step? Like, how did you overcome that? As you said, I was running as fast as I could, but when I got there, I started slowing down. What was it a coach? Was it you? What was it that helped you to next, like, as you said, months and months after, you just went, you know what? I'm going to jump now. I'm going to do this.
No, it wasn't a split kind of like instant change. It was definitely something that happened over the course of time gradually, and just reintroducing myself to the feeling of what a successful version of that jump should feel like again, right? And so, no, I'm not going to slip on the board this time. And so it happens, and then I only jumped 5 meters, but I did it, and then I'm not going to slip on the board, and then I jumped 6 meters this time, but I did it, and so on, until I got back to my normal distances. So it was one of those things where I sort of just like, I edged my way towards what I used to be, but it had to come through repetition. It had to come from the right mental attitude and so on, and being patient too, right? And, I would think that if that happened to me today at 33, almost 34, compared to when it happened to me at 21, that it would probably take even longer for me to sort of get back to that place, right? Just because,
there's a trade-off now.
Yeah, like I'm a believer that, as the older you get, the more stuff's on your mind, the more stuff's in your mind, the more scenarios you'll create and so on, because you've lived longer, right? And so, for that reason, I think that it's just very important to take an easy and slow and steady approach toward these things. And that's what you're going to get the best result from it. On that note as well, I'll tell you something, is that in the gym, I'll say this, I have a little rule for myself where I don't, and I'm not a big power lifter or strong, like I'm not about that really, but if I am training really heavy and I am attempting a PR, a max effort, I want to lift the most that I've lifted in my life or whatever for a given lift in a certain workout, I'm going to make sure that workout happens at the gym that I'm most comfortable at, with the space in that squat cage that I'm the most comfortable at, with my favorite bar, in my favorite outfit when I squat in, with my best shoes on, with my good shoes on, all the stuff, And it doesn't have to get into superstitious stuff at all. It's just you have to be in your comfort zone on every level possible, right? So I'm not going to go to, the LA Fitness downtown Toronto or something like that I'm only going to get a guest pass at for the day and try to squat 435. Like, that's not going to
go home.
Right? Exactly. I got to be in my comfortable habitat, man. And so, find that bar, find that rack, find that positioning that you like, all that stuff. And then it's going to help with that environment. It's sort of like the example that you gave with the Olympic weightlifter, and how you could tell, the person could tell that he didn't have his mind in it quite yet. He was thinking about too much, right? You want to have this sort of position right here where you're kind of like this, and you're even keel, and you're ready to do what you got to do, and there's no distractions that are coming in around you. And that's what's going to give you the best performance, at least in my experience. So I really encourage that kind of thinking for a lot of people out there.
That's a very important note there, because a lot of people, when something goes wrong, they always check, where my macros weren't right, or this wasn't right, and you're like, dude, just go back. Like, there could be something in your mind, you didn't sleep well. There's so many variables all the time, because this mechanism is such a dynamic mechanism changes all the time. So there can be so many variables that can actually inhibit your performance, and that's why you've seen it as an athlete, everything needs to be on point when you're actually doing something.
Yeah. 100%. And, it's all about that consistency. As long as the consistency is there in terms of how, listen, you talk to anybody. I'm a long jumper. I was a long jumper as part of my events. And you talk to anybody, you watch their run up, you watch their warm up, their approach, the whole thing. It's like people can imitate you doing it because of how many times you do the same thing over and over. You take your stride, then you back up, then you take your stride, and then you take off, and so on. It takes you this many steps, and then you do this. It's a routine, right? And because of the fact that you've done that so many times, it's embedded into your code by the time you're a master at it. And that's the way that it really should be. And I don't think that training for performance should be any different either, right? So if we're lifting for a heavy weight or we're trying to get stronger or whatever, these are feats of performance that we're performing. This is just our new playground. It's the gym. And so from that, we have to make sure that we're doing the same right things and we're following that routine so that we're staying like this and there's not too much to distract us from that.
Would you say, though, that we want, because my motto generally is, I'm writing actually now an article about dear consistency, like a letter to consistency, because I say it in myself. So I believe that people are saying, I don't like routine. And you're like, people biologically are craving for routine. Okay, it feels you more stable in numerous things. Like when people say, "Oh, I don't like routine," I was like, "Okay, today you're gonna get paid. Tomorrow we'll see. How about that?" And it's the same thing as at the gym, because I always say that strength is money in the bank. You get stronger in an efficient way. It's like having money in the bank.
Yep.
You can do anything you want, almost, right?
Yep.
But you get to a point when if you don't actually repeat as an athlete or a gym goer a specific movement, which is efficient and is not inhibiting something else, like it will increase a compensatory mechanism, and you're repeating that will fall into injuries or whatever, or not a PB. When you find that movement, as you said, the stride, I'm going to come up, fall back, which is close to perfect. There's nothing perfect, but efficient.
Yep.
You need to find that and repeat it over and over again, so the engrams of your body are there for that efficient movement.
100%. I agree with that completely. And again, it's just going to come from practice through repetition and repetition and repetition. And, again, going back to the age thing, the younger someone is when they're getting introduced to these kinds of things, the easier it is for you to never lose it. If you're returning, like if I was to go back to the track and I get out there and I do some sprint work and so on for conditioning and stuff, but if I was to go back to the track and try to really duplicate all that stuff, it would probably be harder for me to re-catch it or catch on to the groove that I was in way back then. There's a lot of things. You've practiced a million other movements by this point. You've spent time away from it, and there's going to be elements of the deep coordination, that deep sort of neuromuscular coordination and kinesthetic awareness that you had that you don't have anymore. And it's about getting it back and building it back. So from a track perspective, that shows that if you don't use it, then you lose it a little bit, right? Yeah. So from a weight training perspective as well, if you're not practicing these patterns, those movement patterns, and you're not, if you're not thinking about, challenging those patterns at some point during your year, even when you're training and doing a strength training phase and looking at your squat pattern and looking at your hinge pattern and so on, you're not going to be that great at it, and it's not going to get stronger, or it's not going to remain strong even. You have to make sure that you're sort of covering all your bases.
And we had a chat the other day, and I love when you write, and you're a really gifted writer and a gifted coach, because you can see that we've got coaches and we've got entertainers using all the nice gadgets and garments and whatever. I'm an old school, go back to the basics. When you get the basics right, okay, let's try something different. But again, around the basics. What's your case now? What's something that you actually don't really like from how things are evolving in a way?
Are we talking about products here, or are we talking about something else?
I don't want to go to products, because I think demons are going to start coming out of my mouth, because if I hear another person wants to squat on a Bosu ball, I think I'm going to blow my head out, it's...
So I think that, first of all, products, like there's always going to be a new fitness gimmicky kind of product that's out there. So we know that already. Here's the thing. As far as strength and conditioning world goes, it's funny, I'm wearing a T Nation shirt right now. I wrote an article for T Nation, or I was asked to contribute to an article for T Nation that was talking about the most overrated fitness trends that were existing in fitness as we know it. And so everybody said their thing, maybe the core set sort of thing, and, blood flow restriction training, and how people don't really think there's anything use to that. Some people said dietary stuff as well, and different trendy fad-based diets. My answer was actually strength training. And here's why. The reason why is because strength training, or the strength and conditioning world, seems to place a whole lot more of an emphasis on the strength part of that, even though there's two different facets to it. And so the conditioning aspect and the idea of diversifying training, for all the things we've really spoken about for the last 40 minutes here, it's put lower on the list of importance when it shouldn't be. Strength training, there are 11 aspects of fitness, health and skill related fitness. Strength is one of those aspects. Agility, balance, coordination, power, speed, reaction time, you name it. All those other things need to get trained in some capacity in order for us to be a well-rounded, healthy, and fit person. That includes body composition as well. That includes cardiorespiratory capacity. Those things, if you're going to say, okay, I can deadlift 900, but my waist measurement is 48 inches, and my body fat percentage is 37 or something like that. It's like, well, cost benefit, risk reward. What is is there a law of diminishing returns that's playing its part here? Should we really focus on getting stronger in that deadlift? Or do you think the amount of time, probably the amount of injuries we've probably accrued over the course of getting that 900-pound deadlift, is that worth it? How much less functional in life, or less capable, or how much less longevity would you get if you could only deadlift 400 pounds, but you could do this, and this, and this at the same time as well in other areas of fitness? Because that 900-pound deadlifter with a 37% body fat and a 48-inch waist, well, yeah, they can deadlift the 900, but tell them to jog 1 mile and see what happens, right? So ask them what their joints feel like on a day-to-day basis. We have to play the game the proper way and realize that only strength training is not the way to go here. It's important. It might even be the most important, but it's not the only thing. So once you've sort of put that money in the bank, like you said, and you've got the investment, and you have that base of foundation, and you're strong, and you can move hundreds of pounds in several directions over your head and away from your chest, and pull it toward you off the floor, and squat it up, and so on. Well, guess what? You graduated. You can do other things, and you've earned the right to be able to do other things, where strength is a piece of the pie now, and it's still there, but there are other things that you got to focus on. So me personally, I deadlift 5 something, I squat 4 something, I bench 3 something. These are good numbers. And I did that all after that injury happened I told you about as well. So my numbers are looking pretty good. Guess what I'm focused on these days? Calisthenics, body weight stuff. I want to master my body weight and make sure that I'm mobile and strong through all kinds of different angles. I know that at 232 pounds, which is what I am right now, down from 270 almost, by the way, that I still have things that I cannot do with my body weight that I want to master, and if that means that, dropping body fat, for example, is one of the things that would benefit me in these regards, then I'm going to do that, and my lifts and the numbers they're still pretty damn good. So I'm going to keep that there. And so the approach that I'm taking is a lot more holistic, a lot more rounded, and I'm trying to sort of attack lots of different areas of my fitness. So I'm doing my cardio these days. I'm doing elliptical and rowing machine and all that. One day I want to try Pilates out. I really do. And I want to see how hard that is for a guy like me, because it's probably going to kill me. So that's my approach.
If it challenges you, and also it's going to help you, because I know you're not a bias trainer, because there are a lot of bias trainers. I like this, my client's going to do that. When you're actually saying, like, I love body weight, and I started like calisthenics like 6 years ago, and that's why I loved the type of CrossFit, because it encompasses a lot of things that you need to be good at. Yeah. And I'm not saying CrossFit as a brand, I'm just saying that high intensity interval training and, bringing Olympic lifting, which I loved, and all that. And that's really important what you're saying, because you're actually experimenting now that you've got the capacity and you've got the strength in order to do that safely.
Right, exactly. And that's you earn the right. You earn the right to train for higher reps, for example. You earn the right to train in different planes of force. You earn the right to use different variables or different variations of exercises and so on, because you've got the basics down pat and you got strong at them and you're doing them well. So guess what? Now you can move on to the next thing for a new challenge. And, if somebody's looking for some kind of results as well in terms of their fitness improving, then it's worth noting that if you got really good at squats enough to squat 900 pounds or whatever, or deadlift 800 pounds or whatever, you have to understand that efficiency is kind of a killer for more gains, if that makes sense, in the sense of if you get really good at something and you've mastered a pattern and you've got the physics right down to a T and it's an art and you can move that weight and get your body around it perfectly, well, that's great for the purposes of that lift. But now it's going to take you less energy for every rep and for every set and so on, because you don't have a struggle that you have to do in finding your positioning and rebalancing and recalibrating this and that as you go along, right? It's something Dan John talks about a whole lot. You want to find movements that you kind of suck at, and that's what's going to get you better faster, right? So I'm always on that sort of search nowadays. I want to get killed by an exercise. Not that it does me in, but I want it to really, really work me. And I want the exercise to win and me not the one winning by killing all the weights, right? So that's the way that I like to approach it. And I think that it's sort of a real reason behind a lot of the results I've gotten so far in the last 9 or so months.
That's an amazing amazing way of thinking. Thank God it's not we're a lot out there that actually do that, because I think that challenge you actually change you in a better way, and they make a better person, a better coach. Because when you see that you suck in something, it can be devastating. You're like, or you can quit, or you can say, you know what, I'm going to master this.
Right.
I know you're busy. Last question that I think we need to appreciate some people in our lives, and how, like Coach Lee or Lee, which are some people that mentored you in one way or another or helped you to become who you are today?
Okay, so let me see here. The first person that comes to mind is my first trainer that I ever had. And I'm not talking about when I was an athlete. I'm talking about in the fitness industry, first personal trainer. I was a trainer who hired a personal trainer. And as a side note, I highly encourage any young trainer who wants to develop, who wants to learn. This is a step that I think is invaluable to your progress is, respected trainers out there, you look up to them, get them to work with you, get them to train you directly.
Perfect.
If you have goals in the gym, have them help you to reach them. And the influence they're going to have over you, the things you're going to be able to soak in, and the new methods you'll be able to learn and ask questions during that hour and so on, it's going to be a game changer. So I hired a trainer, and I'd say that guy was the first person that comes to mind in terms of having a huge step, pushing me in the right direction as far as learning my stuff. So that was number one. And then there's a lot of writers and people who I really looked up to, who I'm very happy to call friends of mine these days, whose information I just consumed like crazy. Guys like Tony Gentilcore, Dan John, Chad Waterbury's articles were great, Nick Tominello, all those kinds of people. Mark Ripto's work for Starting Strength, the book series, that is still my go-to in terms of learning the fundamentals and the physical principles of moving heavy weights in the big primal movement patterns. It's fantastically written. So, these are the people who I sort of looked up to the most, Mike Robertson, Dan John, all those kinds of names. And I could go on with a long list there, but these are the prime influencers for me.
Lee, I know that we will see you in Europe, hopefully in London and in Greece soon when things go back to normal.
That'd be awesome.
I'm looking forward to that. I really appreciate your time and actually the things you've been doing for the industry, always making a difference, always trying to make it better.
I appreciate that.
Thank you so much, man.
No problem. I look forward to getting out to Europe and hopefully spreading the word out there. And otherwise I'm going to keep on doing what I'm doing up until that point.
Always a pleasure. And hopefully see you soon when everything goes back to normal.
That's right, man. See you soon.
See you.